Oral communication in context. This subject reminds us of our opportunities to be able to communicate with people, with groups of people, and perhaps just with ourselves, because you can actually do so. This subject gives us opportunities on how we could evaluate ourselves in terms of what our strengths and weaknesses are as speakers and as people who are going to deliver messages, ideas, and opinions in front of other people. To begin, Lesson 1 provides the nature and elements of communication. You have there a definition of communication as provided by Merriam-Webster's dictionary. That definition gives us the idea that it is, and first and foremost, an act or process. When we say that it is a process, an act, it is being carried out, and it is a process, communication has steps to follow or procedures to take. It may not be as stringent as how it is with other processes, but we cannot deny that before we say something, our minds try to process that information first. We need to also come up with a means of sharing information to other people and the medium of having that information channeled. Will it be through actions? Will it be through spoken words? Will it be through printed form? See, before we eventually decide to have information communicated, there's a process that needs to be observed. In this process, we use words, we use signs, sounds, and even bodily behaviors to be able to express or exchange information or ideas, thoughts, and feelings to someone else. Take note in this definition, in the first definition provided by Merriam-Webster's dictionary, there is an involvement of another person. There is a someone else included in that definition. This recognizes the fact that in communication, at least two individuals are involved. Sir, what about the act of communicating with oneself? That still involves two individuals. The individual, the person who speaks, and the same person who listens, or for whom that message is being delivered to. If you want, like in my case, if I want to tell something to myself, this self of mine takes on two roles: the role of a speaker and the role of a recipient or receiver of the message that I am also telling to myself. See, one body can have two identities in this context of communication. But of course, there is the typical or usual practice where one individual or a group of individuals would converse with another person or with another group of persons, thus meeting the definition of communication. Another definition provided by Miriam is that it is a message that is given to someone, perhaps in the form of a letter, a telephone call, or a message, a text message, a private message, etc. Proceeding with an elaboration of this definition of communication, we now touch the natures of communication. First, communication is obviously related to human activity. In the many activities that humans are involved with in a day, we communicate. In a classroom setup, we do. While you are at home, you are communicating. While you converse with your family while taking your dinner, your lunch, or your breakfast, you are communicating. While asking for something from a classmate privately through chat, or when you see him or her, you are communicating. When you tell someone to do something for you, communication is involved. Sir, what about when I go to sleep? When you pray before going to sleep, communication is involved. When you are just talking to yourself, that is another activity, you are communicating with yourself. So again, it cannot be denied. Communication is related definitely to a human activity or to human activities. Second nature of communication, it involves two or more parties. That was already exemplified earlier. It would require at least two parties involved for communication to take place. However, allow me to also proceed right away with the third nature of communication. Communication may be a one-way process or a two-way process, even with at least two parties involved. Let's assume that the communication that I'm talking about has something to do with IC and Viona. It is possible that IC shares a number of information to Viona and Viona wouldn't respond at all. Viona won't have to show any reaction. Viona won't have to give any response or a message as a response. So what happened there was that everything in that communication came from IC and making communication a one-way process. It becomes a two-way process if Viona gives her reaction, gives a form of feedback, a form of response to whatever IC had shared. In that manner, Viona now becomes a provider of information while IC receives those information. The process is reversed. When it originally came from IC as the provider with Viona as the receiver, the role is exchanged. And Viona becomes the provider and IC becomes a receiver. And perhaps after that, IC provides another information and Viona receives, and the process continues. No matter how long the continuation is of the process, we could see an exchange coming from IC and Viona, which makes conversation a two-way process. The fourth nature of communication, it says, success of communication depends on a proper understanding of the parties involved. Correct. For communication to successfully be done, Party A needs to have an understanding of what Party B wants to say. And in the same way, Party B has to understand what Party A is trying to convey. Conversations need to have a common understanding or a common ground of understanding unless there are problems along the way. There just might be barriers or hindrances that will inhibit you from fully understanding each other's share of the conversation, which in turn will lead to an unsuccessful communication. The fifth nature of communication tells us that conversation in organization flows in a variety of styles. It could be that it's a conversation between a person of a higher authority and of a lower authority, lower position. It could be a conversation between people who belong to the same level of authority. Or like for instance, at home, when it's a conversation between you and your parents, that's what you call a vertical conversation or communication. If it's a conversation between you and your siblings, that's horizontal conversation. Because you and your siblings belong to the same category. And there are still many other versions of this. It could be a conversation between you and a significant other. For sure, the tone of your conversation changes. If you and your significant other would converse, probably you would not use that same tone that you have between you and your parents. Because that person has a different impact to you. So the approach could be different. Or when you converse with someone and a person whom you consider as an acquaintance, for sure, your tone is different compared to when you converse with a best friend. You won't invest much of yourself in that conversation because the person you're conversing with is a mere acquaintance compared to conversing with your best friend or again with your significant other. So that proves that there is a variety of styles that people can incorporate when they converse, when they involve themselves in communications or conversations. Questions so far? If there's none, I'll proceed to the elements of communication. Did you get the chance to have a speech class? To those who were students in IA here when they were in grade 8, did you have the chance to be a speech student of Ma'am Zen? Did you have a speech class then when you were in grade 8? But in elementary, you did. But when you were in grade 8, not anymore, because Ma'am Zen had a speech class before when she was given that she was a faculty member as well. She taught speech subjects in elementary and the speech subject in the high school department. That's where students had learned the line that says speech is the best show man puts on. So many of our speech students should know that. High school speech students should know that. As for the elements of communication, these elements have remained to be the same all throughout. In so many speech classes, these elements would come out. There is a person who is considered as the one who provides the message with the intent of passing information. We call that person the sender. At some point in our lives, we have all become senders of information. We've had our share of being a sender of an information, of being a speaker. Sometimes this sender is also referred to as a speaker. By the way, um, when you answer the module, the ST that I'll place in Edmodo, I think everyone is here in this call. Let's agree, let's agree. You will use the terms found in the module. I hope that's clear and that's clear to everyone. You will use the terms found in the module, not the terms which you feel like using whenever you feel like using it. For instance, yes, yes, Mark. Hmm? I'm referring to the. Wait, I'm just mentioning what's going to happen in your exam on Saturday. This is there's another exam that you'll take on Friday. By the way, these instructions of mine hold to be true to all of my subjects. If there are terms that are asked from you, because definitely there will be, use the terms found in the module. Please, let that be a common understanding among us. Like for instance, here in the term sender, for sure, the word sender is synonymous to the word speaker. But Edmodo will acknowledge the answer named as sender because I'll also indicate that in my instructions that the terms that you shall use are the ones found in our module, not any synonymous term that you could think of, as in the case of the word speaker replacing the word sender. Again, we shall use the word sender and not speaker because sender is what's found here in your module. That is to facilitate an easier way of checking your exam because Edmodo is going to check your test. Let's proceed with the second element. The second element of communication is the subject matter of the communication, which is identified as the idea. Synonymous to the idea is the word message. You might have commonly known of this element as the message. This is, in this module, labeled as idea. What you wanted to share or convey, which could be in the form of an opinion, an attitude, perhaps your feelings, or an order, a suggestion, a viewpoint, an argumentation, a disagreement, whatever it may be that you wanted to share or convey, that's the message, which in this module is named as idea. Next element, the element of encoding. Encoding is a process of converting, it's a conversion process, converting subject matter into symbols that you would use to reach the person who's going to receive that message. What symbols? Again, the symbols may be letters, words, actions, signs, or behaviors. Once you convert that idea into any of these symbols and you are ready to have that translated now and delivered to the other person, you are doing the process of encoding. And encoding cannot be done without a communication channel. Your communication channels could be through writing or through spoken language. Or those who are unfortunate of not using one, through their gestures. So that's your communication channel. Then comes the person who will receive that message or idea. That person is known here in the module as the receiver, or sometimes referred to as the audience or listener. But again, your module labels it as receiver. The receiver will have to do a particular process. If the sender is doing an act of encoding, the receiver does an act of decoding. The receiver will try to interpret that message, that idea that he received or she received from the sender. Interpret it in order to be able to extract the meaning from that idea which he or she is supposed to understand. And lastly, that receiver provides a form of feedback or a process of giving a response, a reaction to whatever has been received from the sender. And then the sender eventually receives that feedback. Let's use once again the names of IC and Viona. IC will be our first sender. Viona is our first receiver. And then right after decoding IC's message, Viona will provide a feedback to IC. In that manner, Viona becomes a sender of the feedback, and then IC takes the role of a receiver of the feedback. As Viona has become a sender of the feedback, Viona will encode her feedback, and IC will decode it for her to understand what the feedback was of Viona. She'll decode as she will now become a listener herself. So those are your elements of communication. Any questions so far? Before I proceed. When I did that discussion of the elements of communication, yes, Mark?
Slit-like passageway, it will vibrate, creating the so-called sound.
When I said, is there any question, that was an opportunity for you to raise questions to that part of the discussion that I just had. It's not that I'm asking you of anything and I want you to really answer it, but I'm actually giving you the opportunity to raise any question. Should there be any confusion coming from your end? Do you have a question, Mark, about the discussion that I've had so far?
Because this
Our discussion? We've already had two subtopics already. We've talked already, actually three. We've talked already of the definition of communication. We've touched the nature of communication and the elements of communication. Don't you have your module with you right now, Mark?
let's say bacteria will
Mark,
accumulate
don't you have with you your module right now?
some migration
Hello,
of
your mother actually
bacteria.
came
So
to.
then
Yes, it's that one. Correct. It's that one.
that commission class will lead us to
You can actually look at that while the discussions are going on.
larynx, which is called
I
laryngitis.
suggest that while discussions are going on, you also look at what's found in the module. That's what your classmates are actually doing. They are browsing at the module. They are going over the module while discussions are provided, and they might want to take down notes and add it to the module that they have.
Is having a problem because of the dirty food
Okay.
that we eat.
Everything is in the module so far, Mark.
I have a consent.
This is different from yesterday where this is different from what's done in philo earlier because there were some things in the presentation which are not found in the module. But this time, I tell you, my discussions are found, the terms that I mentioned, they're actually found in the module.
That's why if your
Okay,
larynx will entail
I'll proceed.
experience the so-called laryngitis.
As for the process of communication, actually, I've shown it, I've done and shared an example of that with the names of IC and Fiona. The process of communication incorporates these elements of communication.
If your
We have a sender, we have a receiver.
salivary glands
The sender provides an idea which is being encoded, and it cannot be completed without choosing a communication channel. That communication channel, by the way, sometimes is referred to as a medium. So that communication channel courses the idea that has been encoded by the sender and will be received by the receiver. The receiver will interpret and decode that message, will extract the meaning from that message or idea. And then, in I'll put you on mute for a while, Mark, ha?
is also called the windpipe.
At some point,
A pipe
that
is for the
message
purpose of
will solicit some form of feedback from the receiver. That feedback is brought to the sender, original sender, thereby creating a feedback loop. It's a loop. Why? IC and Fiona, I'll use your names again. So here's IC, here's Fiona. When IC sends her message, Fiona provides a feedback as well to IC after decoding it. And they continue exchanging information. The exchange is what creates the feedback loop until their conversation comes to an end. If when someone says, "Hi, how are you?" and the response is, "I'm fine." And what about you? The question of what about you is a form of feedback. Even the response of "I'm fine" added with "what about you" is a form of feedback. And then the person responds, "I'm also doing well. Right now, where are you going?" So there's a continuous giving of responses, thereby creating a feedback loop. But the thing is, I made mention of it earlier, sometimes there just might be a challenge in our undertaking of communication. Noise proves to be one big factor that contributes to blocking communication. In the presence of many other barriers, I'd like to isolate this discussion on communication noise. That kind of blockage to successful communication between two speakers, or sometimes I'd use the word interlocutors, between two or more, between or among interlocutors. There are many types of noise that you might encounter. The first one is physiological impairment noise. This has something to do with physical maladies that are going to prevent effective communication. Like there are already issues with a person that would hinder him or her from achieving successful or participating in successful communications. For instance, if someone is deaf or has a hearing impairment,
will be collectively called
that hearing impairment is a blockage towards hearing the message. But of course, there are other ways to decode the message. Like it could be written down or be read from somewhere. But that hearing impairment is already a blockage in itself. Blindness is another physical malady that impairs one's successful participation in communication. Why? The sense of sight is a very helpful tool in communication. It would help you see how symbols and signs actually look like. But if you cannot see them properly, that proves to be a blockage to communication. But then there are other options that are available. The Braille system was created, or you could just be told right away of what the message is. Because if you are blind, then if your sense of hearing is still functional, your sense of hearing would take it for you. Semantic noise. Semantic noise comes out when there are different interpretations because words might contain multiple meanings. When there is a word that is meant to mean in some way but has not been understood that way by the other person. Like, what if you'll say, I need a hand. Generally, I need a hand would say, I need help. But what if someone took it literally? So that literal understanding of it wouldn't make sense and might lead to conflicts. And so, a semantic noise. Let's have another noise. Syntactical noise. This syntactical noise is a product of an error in grammar, which would probably lead to disruptions in communication. There are people who, in their failure to follow the rules in grammar, have then created statements that cannot be understood well. This is a fallacy. This is a fallacy of amphibology. Di ba we had that in debate when you were with me in grade 9? A fallacy and amphibology. I share that to you. A fallacy and amphibology where the construction of the statement is what leads to a misinterpretation. Its grammatical construction is what leads to a misinterpretation. Like for instance, misplaced modifiers. Di ba misplaced modifiers bring about misinterpretations? And that's one issue. I need a bag and a coat which is expensive. What if it's like that? I need a bag and a coat which is expensive. In that sentence, which between the bag and the coat was deemed to be expensive? Again, the sentence, I need a bag and a coat which is expensive. So which between the two was described to be expensive? It's the coat. But what if the speaker wanted it to refer instead to the bag? Or what if it should have rather been the two items? Correct, Lorraine? What if it should have been rather the two items which are supposed to be expensive? It's the problem with the verb is. See, look at what problem comes out because of the error in grammar. If the speaker wanted to have both items to be expensive, instead of using is, the speaker should have used are. I want a bag and a coat which are expensive. The use of are would denote a plurality, and that corresponds to the two items, the bag and the coat. See, a syntactical noise. an error in grammar, a mistake in grammar, which has influenced or caused an effect in the interpretation of the statement. Another noise, organizational noise. Like if there are unclear and badly stated directions, which would make the receiver even more lost. Clarity of directions would solve organizational noise. Cultural noise. If there's a conflict, or yeah, if there's probably a conflict or disagreement between what one believes and another person believes, and so there comes to be a conflict, and they could not meet an understanding, and that's brought about by cultural noise. A clear example, the verbal wrangling that happens. I think it's not there anymore. The verbal wrangling that occurred in the plaza on whose religion is better than the other, on whose religion could really save people. When they argue, they really are creating noise. They are. Like they're really loud. It's not just sound that you're hearing from them. That's already noise. They're distracting, disruptive as well, and they're not giving each other the opportunity to be well heard and understood. In fact, their conversations would not be ended with a common understanding, because they would not want one, because not one from them wants to be outdone by the other. They are not willing to meet at a compromise. So that's a cultural noise. Psychological noise. This is one which relates to certain attitudes which could contribute to communication difficulty. Like if someone is too angry for you to have a conversation with that person might not be open to opinions, because the anger of that person is what supersedes the conversation, or the person is just so sad to be involved in a conversation. The feeling of sadness is overwhelming, and it is what's governing the conversation. That instead of absorbing what another person is trying to say, di ba, it's quite common practice. A person is too sad. There's a person who wants to console that person. Instead of receiving the confidence feeling of consolation to the one who is sad, that nothing gets processed because the emotion of sadness is too overwhelming. Last type of noise is environmental noise, and that's quite a physical one. Like the noise that you hear around you when there are cars running around, when there are constructions like now. Maybe one of you there is in a house, and there are constructions going on in the house. The construction sound that you're hearing together with my voice is an environmental type of noise. Or like when you hear another teacher's voice over my voice, that's an environmental noise. It's a kind, diba, there's one that you can hear right now. Oh, see? That's an example of an environmental noise. In the same way, when there's a heavy downpour of the rain, sometimes teachers would pause. Even on a face-to-face setup, teachers would pause if the downpour of the rain is just too heavy and too strong. Because that's an environmental noise that we find too hard to compete with. And so we pause. Questions regarding communication noise. You could hear an environmental noise now. If I turn my microphone off, you can't hear any.
This is what you're going to say when you go to your store.
There it is again. Environmental noise. It's because of the common space that we share. I share with Zerjet. Questions regarding communication noise. Questions.
The spongy portion here is
Questions, people. Questions.
uvula.
Go, Lorraine.
If you happen to see the mouth,
Oh. Go. Let's see what we can do about that question.
This is the uvula. Fleshy finger-like.
Actually, when you said earlier, Lorraine, that it's not about oral com, the first thing that came into my mind is, I hope this is not about research. But actually it is, okay. As of this time, um, I'm more inclined,
When
Lorraine,
we
for
trace the
research to be
flow
done in
here,
pairs.
it goes to your
Ever since
basal
I
cavity
found that a
and
group
runs
of
into your
four is
pharynx.
already a
This is the
crowd.
whole pharynx part
A
area.
crowd. Why? If research
So,
is done by two persons, it could be in this setup. I'll do the research of information,
just
you
don't
encode.
microwave. It looks like weird.
Diba?
Looks like
Like
an
I'll send this to you, you
This
encode
is
it
the
for
whole
our pair.
pharynx.
Okay.
Uh,
If it's a group of three now, I'll search for information, you
the
encode,
pharynx
perhaps
is
the
the
other
area
could
that
help
has
us with our
where
resources.
you
Not
because
sources,
the pharynx is the region of the neck.
resources.
This is right
Meaning,
here is the
okay, I'll
upper
provide the bond
pharynx.
paper.
The
Or
upper pharynx directly towards
I'll
your
just pay
the basal
for.
cavity.
Oh,
And
there's
this is
but
the
of course that I'm not saying
laryngeal pharynx.
that you should really
There is
have that
also
role
the
only. But
larynx.
who knows? The
Okay?
third person might be a provider of moral support.
Sorry to erase
I'll
this.
pray for our group. I'll pray for the success of our group. If there are four persons now, what will the fourth person
Notice
do?
that I have here an illustration
Diba?
which
So
gives
if
us two pathways.
actually,
Pathway number one and
huy, last year
pathway
they did it individual. I see online.
pathway number one and pathway number two.
But actually, I see.
On pathway number
I
one,
get the point where you want to have it at three, and three is my maximum number of members in a group. Again, have three is the maximum. I don't anymore because if I go with four, I cannot anymore think of what possible role the fourth member may take. There's already a prayer warrior. There's already a provider of moral support. In fact, last year there's one group that had that had three members because the number was uneven. It was an odd numbered class, and so the others are composed of pairs. And then one group had a triad. As to who your group mates will be, that's something that I'll determine later on. Or, as done last year, it's one which was decided by the class. Last year, I gave the students the opportunity to group themselves according to what they wanted. Why? Why did I do it that way? In allowing students to group themselves according to choice, to their choice, that would give me an assurance that they could really do research and finish what I asked from them because they already got the chance to choose their members, their group mates. I understand that if I group you with someone whom you are not comfortable with yet, that just might affect your group dynamics. It just might. But if you are not also going to group yourself with that person, you could not also expand your own horizons. Char, I'm speaking from the standpoint of a values ed teacher because I also have values ed to teach this year. Anyway, we'll see because I still have to know what your actual and final number is. If you end up to be 21 in actual number, that would mean 7 triads. Exactly 7.
Why is it considered the guardian?
If 21, I hope and pray that you really end up with a good with a number that is really divisible by an exact number as well.
Because only air is allowed in the
Anyway, later on we'll go into that. And I think Lorraine, that answers your question.
What do you think will happen if it reaches your lungs?
Okay. We proceed with the types of communication, and there are 3.
You'll die eventually.
What are our types of communication? Communication could be verbal, non-verbal, or written in form. Verbal communication is oral communication, which you do most of the time with the people around you, with your classmates, with your friends, with the families, with the members of the family that you have at home. You do verbal communication most of the time. But verbal communication sometimes won't be enough. That is why there are 2 other options. Like, we have non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication does not use any any word expressed orally or in written form. Non-verbal communication is reliant on bodily expressions, body language, gestures. facial expressions, and even your posture. The combination of verbal and nonverbal communication is what we are also hoping to see in a good public speaker. Someone who has understood well the incorporation of verbal and nonverbal communication knows what to say and how to say it. See? That's the goal there. Verbal and nonverbal communication put together creates a public speaker who knows what to say and how to say it. The what of what to say corresponds to the content and the correct use of words in the delivery of a message. The how on how to say tells us of how a person should carry himself in his or her attempt to deliver an idea or a message, which would include the voice of the voice, the tone of the voice, the movements of the hands, the gestures of the hands, the movement of the body, the language of the body, the way the person sits, the way the person stands, all of those constitute nonverbal communication. And again, once paired with verbal communication, that would help create a good public speaker, which of course is also the goal of this subject. The last form of communication is written communication. Of course, as the word suggests, this is a kind of communication which is translated into printed text or written text, a text that can be read and seen by the eyes. Encoding is done through writing, decoding is done through writing. They say that writing is the highest form of skill in communication. There are 4 macro skills in communication. Now they have added a 5th one, but I'd like us to start to focus on the 4 major skills of communication: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Written communication or writing is believed to be the highest level among these 4 macro skills of communication. It is believed that writing tries to incorporate your experiences from listening, speaking, and reading. Whatever it is that you have listened to, you should be able to transform that into written form. Then, what your mind and mouth are ready to deliver, you should also be capable of putting that into writing. What you have read from somewhere, you should be able to translate that into written form. So again, the incorporation of those 3 other skills thereby allow for writing to be also practiced. Effective communication. You have there 14 tips or 14 effective communication skills. The first one is you give them the impression that you're enthusiastic about talking to them. You present to others that you have the interest to talk to them. Because if you don't, this interest can actually be read. A person's feeling of disinterest can be read through his facial expressions and his bodily gestures or body language. Like, if you are communicating with someone who is not interested with your topic, you would really see that with the face of the person. Like, it would show in a face-to-face setup. Oh, okay, really? I see. You would expect that the responses are not even going to be as long compared to someone who is interested in the conversation. Like, did you know Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are getting stronger? And then someone would say, okay. That okay would end the conversation. Is capable of ending a conversation. It would be worse if it appeared through a text message or a chat where you are just responded to with a letter K with a dot. K dot. Diba? If you receive that message, let's face it, you'd find it difficult to come up with another topic which would invite a conversation. Or in the practice now, if someone sends ha 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 and then you reply ha ha ha, that should give you a signal that the conversation is coming to an end, to a close. And then what comes after the second ha 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 is an emoji. And then you'll start flooding each other with an emoji because you think like, wait, I'm not interested anymore of sending an emoji, but if I don't, it feels as though I'm a rude person if I don't reply or respond. That rationalization, that philosophizing that you did is already you showing disinterest. Or if the other person did that, that's the interest or the lack of enthusiasm anymore. So to establish effective communication, a show of enthusiasm helps. Next, ask open-ended questions about their interests. Or basically, you float open-ended questions. Because open-ended questions are open for topics and elaborations. Longer conversations could possibly happen. Next, adapt to their body language and feelings. Yes, understand what they are showing in their gestures, their body language, and what emotions they are also providing. Next, show them approval. Tell them that what you admire about them and why. This would make them feel good, and that this would invite them to have a good conversation with you. Listen attentively to everything. Listen attentively to everything that they say. Attention can actually be determined by our body language. How attentive we are to what others say to us can be examined, can be determined by how we project ourselves. If we turn our backs to others, for sure that doesn't show much of attention. If we are just if the person is talking to you and that you are not looking at the person in the same way, that just might tell the speaker, the sender, that you are not highly attentive or not highly interested to the conversation that's being done. And again, this can be read from us. This can be read through whatever it is that we show to the sender or to the speaker. We also reveal as much about ourselves to other people as much as possible. It just might also be a point of discussion with them, and that would invite a good topic of the conversation. We give them our best. No, you give the impression that we are on the same team, that you are on the same team as them. Also, you give them your best smile. Like when you smile, perhaps, only of course if the conversation would really, look, John is smiling already. Only of course if the conversation would solicit a smile. But if that person is confiding something to you of an experience that is so hurtful and that you are smiling do not also smile the entire time while the conversation is going on, because surely that's going to look weird. Imagine. Yeah. Imagine if this discussion is done with a smile its entire time. For sure, at least one of you there would wish that I would turn my camera on if I had smiled the entire time while the discussions are being given. So I would not. But let's not forget that at some point in the conversation, we offer or we do not hesitate to offer the best smile that we could offer to our conversants. We offer helpful suggestions, we offer encouragement, we appear to have a slightly higher energy level than the other person, and we say their name in a way that is pleasing to their ears. We do not murder their names, we do not offend them by murdering their names, and we offer to take the relationship a step further. We try to bring that communication relationship further. Like, you might want to establish a moment by which you could converse on some other time, or you could expand the topic that you already have to some other topics. That is to give your other interlocutor the feeling that you are really engaged or you are really interested to have longer conversations with him or her.
Asthma is just an allergic
As of now, it's
reaction
already 11:45. On
caused by
Thursday, we
allergens.
shall continue the discussion on the barriers of communication. If you look at this module, there are no items to
That
answer.
answer
So
is
on
related
Thursday,
to
we'll have the continuation of the discussions.